I'm hanging my monitor from the ceiling.
Because I'm in the process of building out my dream home office, and I don't really want to be stuck at the same desk all day just because that's where my computer is.
I'm imagining an office where I can work my 9 to 5 from my main desk, do my hobbies at my built-ins, and game in my lounge chair, all from the same monitor. But when I shared this idea online, people were split. Some loved it, others said I should just buy a laptop, or that it would make my office look like a dentist's office. But there's really only one way to find out. So after I build it, I'm going to use it for a week to decide if it belongs in my dream home office or if this whole thing was a mistake. To build such a complex project, I'm breaking it into 3 parts: the base, the arm, and the monitor. And this entire project actually starts with the base. The base has a pretty simple job in theory, and that's just to prevent the entire monitor arm from crashing to the ground. Because I don't want this thing hitting me on the head on its way down, safety is kind of my #1 priority. My first idea for designing the base is just a rotating mount that pivots around the arm. The problem I'm having with this design is that it transfers all of the forces into a single ceiling joist, which creates a single point of failure. Since this thing will be hanging above my head on a regular basis, I don't feel comfortable with it only being supported by a single joist. So I'm scrapping the idea and trying to iterate on it. Other than this thing falling from the sky, I really want to make sure this design looks like it's meant for a home office. It'd be a shame to spend all of this time building a modern office and the monitor arm looks like something a dentist would use. I think what we can do instead is basically spread the load across multiple joists. And I'm thinking the best way to do that is going to be to use a metal frame. I landed on this simplified X design. It would allow me to spread the load and it fit the modern design I was going for. So the first part we need to build for the base is a part I like to call the saddle bracket. You know, it kind of looks like a saddle. This will mount directly to the center joist to handle the weight of the system. And then we can attach the base to it and the other joist to spread out the load. I cut the parts for the saddle bracket. Now, I have some experience with cutting metal, so this part was relatively easy. And now it's time to weld the first parts. But there's just one problem. I don't know how to weld. I've only welded once back in college, and my welding skills back then wouldn't have held 2 magnets together. I watched a couple videos on YouTube and got some general advice from some people that know how to weld, so how hard could it be? I'm practicing on a scrap piece of metal so I get a feel for welding. My first weld looks absolutely terrible. After about an hour of practicing, I'm starting to get the hang of it, but I'm not quite consistent yet. So now that I have a little practice welding, we can actually start welding the saddle bracket. I think I just made like one of the most rookie mistakes. Completely forgot to turn the gas on, so 2 of these 3 welds just look like shit. Not having the gas turned on means it turns out splotchy like this, and it's just not as strong as it should be. After turning on the gas, I took my time with the rest of the welds, and I'm actually pretty happy with how they turned out. But there's a problem that I didn't see coming. Welding the bracket completely bent the metal. The thing I'm learning about welding is that when you apply a tremendous amount of heat to one side of a piece of metal, it ends up bending it. The name for this is weld distortion. Luckily, I'm getting pretty good at the old hammer trick, so I can straighten out this part and we can move on to building the actual X frame. And just like that, we have a saddle bracket. The frame for this base is pretty straightforward to build. It's made out of square tubing and will be super rigid, which is great for making sure this thing stays attached to the ceiling. So far, I've cut the tubing, pre-drilled the holes for mounting, notched and assembled the tubes to form an X shape. And now I'm welding them together. While I was doing this, I learned a valuable lesson today. Never wear work jeans with holes while welding.
Whoa, whoa, whoa!
The frayed material acts as kindling for your knee, and it gets really hot really fast. The only thing I'm less a fan of than catching my pants on fire is this weld distortion. I feel like there's probably ways to mitigate this, but maybe it's just part of welding. I don't know. It took a lot of bending with a press to finally get it mostly straight. After wrapping up work on the parts for the base, I headed back to the office to make sure the ceiling was ready for install. So the house we're going to be installing this in is about 100 years old. Now I can confidently say whenever they built this house, no one was anticipating someone installing a ceiling mounted monitor arm. So I've got to take that into consideration. I made a bit of a mistake with the ceiling. I remodeled this room last year and I already finished drywalling the entire ceiling. And at that time, I installed support for the original design. But now that I'm going with the X-frame, this just won't work. So we need to update the support to match the new base. I've done the math, and because we're spreading the load across multiple joists, we should be completely fine for the weight and forces this thing is going to see. But there are a few small knots and cracks in the wood that make me a little worried. So just to be absolutely certain, I'm going to double up on these outer joists to handle the forces that they will see. That means pre-drilling everything, fitting the joists in place, and making about 5 miserable trips into the attic to bolt it all together.
I am too big for this.
This is where it's hot and you never quite know what's crawling around up there. With the ceiling reinforced, I can install the saddle bracket and the other frame brackets. Now I just need to install this access panel I made that will cover this hole in a way that we still have access to the ceiling. And now for the fun part. Well, actually this part was not fun to install. We're on like attempt number 8 of trying to get this thing installed. In retrospect, whoever designed this thing should have thought a little bit more about the installation process. At this point, I'm really hoping this thing is worth all of this effort once it's finished. But after a while of struggling, I was finally able to get the base installed. Before I could figure out how to mount everything to the arm, I had to decide what this setup was actually going to include. And that started with the monitor. This is a OLED monitor. From the beginning, I was like, I want ultra wide. And then obviously my brain went to 49-inch ultra wide. And then I thought about trying to physically move a 49-inch monitor around the room. And I was like, I'm gonna hit literally everything every time I try to move that thing. So it's just not the most practical. So I was like, we're not going with 49-inch. I currently run 27-inch monitors. So I was like, well, I'm only gonna have one monitor, so I don't want a 27-inch. So 34 actually seemed pretty reasonable for the things that I do. So I was like, gotta have a 34-inch. Because I can get a 34-inch and it has all of the other requirements that I have. So 34 inches felt like the best balance between screen space and something I could realistically move around the room. But if this is truly going to be a great feature for my dream home office, it can't just hold a monitor. It needs to carry all of my peripherals and even a secondary display. This is the configuration I have in mind. Because the arm is going to be able to move around the room, all of this stuff needs to move with it. And on top of that, I don't just need to connect all of this to one computer, I need to connect it to 2. My work laptop and my personal computer. And I planned ahead on this one when I bought my monitor last year and made sure it had a KVM switch built into it. So I'll be able to switch my monitor and peripherals between the 2 computers. Now, obviously I can't just run cables straight from the computer to the monitor because then I'd literally have cables strung across the room. So when I remodeled the room, I installed tubing inside the ceilings and walls so I'd have a hidden path to run everything through. But that introduces a whole new problem, distance, because now the cables have to travel from the monitor arm, through the ceiling, down the wall, across my basement, and into the tech cabinet where the computers are stored. To run a cable from this cabinet to the ceiling and then to the monitor, it's going to be about 40 feet. I've never really ran anything longer than like 10 foot because I've never really needed to. But I do know that standard copper cables aren't really meant to run at that distance. Signal can drop. Bandwidth gets limited. If I can't make this work smoothly from that far away, this entire idea of this project falls apart. I'm estimating that all of this equipment I'll be connecting to it is going to weigh no more than 50 pounds. But before I can even worry about how I'm going to connect all of this stuff, I should probably build the actual arm, and then we can deal with that later. Honestly, the base was just a warm-up. This arm is where things get serious, because the arm has to do one thing really well: reach. It needs to move the monitor across the room to 3 key areas: my standing desk for work, the built-ins for hobbies, and the lounge for gaming. To make that work, the arm has to solve 2 problems: swing far enough to reach every position, and second, it needs to move up and down to work for both sitting and standing. To tackle the first problem of reaching these desk positions, it means the arm needs to be able to reach a minimum of 5.5 feet from the base, because the hard part isn't just hanging 50 pounds from the arm, it's hanging 50 pounds that far away from the center. And the farther the weight gets from the center of the arm, the more leverage it creates. It's the same reason holding a weight close to your body feels easier than holding the exact same amount of weight with your arm stretched all the way out. If we simply attach an arm that is 5.5 feet long, it will only be able to reach areas that are in the path of the perimeter. And on top of that, I need the monitor to sit between the built-ins, and this is just not going to work. What we really need is a design that will be able to reach anywhere within the radius of the base. I've got an idea for a better design, but I have to travel and am stuck in a hotel for the weekend, so I decided to pack my entire setup and work on the designs from here. I really like the design of this arm idea. It's based off an articulating jib crane, which is just a fancy way of saying an arm with a pivot point in the middle of it. It's simple, and the design would allow for the end of the arm to be moved just about anywhere within the arm's radius. This seems like the perfect design, but a lot of times when I have ideas for a project, I like to build an initial prototype using cheaper materials. This allows me to find the immediate flaws in the design without spending a whole lot of money. I usually do this with a 3D printer, but since I'm nearly 1,000 miles away from my shop, I'll have to get creative. I'm not sure if I'm the first person to tape pizza boxes to the ceiling of a hotel or not, but the prototype served its purpose. You can see the connection between the 2 arms are rather loose, where the toilet paper roll connects to the 2 breadstick boxes. This is something we're going to have to be careful about in our final design. If we don't create a strong and tight connection between the 2 arms, this monitor arm will be really tough to move around the room because it won't be able to rotate smoothly. I've got the designs for the arm done to a point where I can start building, and this will be even more of a challenge than the base because I have to use a bunch of different machines I've never used before to build these parts. We're starting off with the arm segments. These segments are made out of rectangular tubing similar to the frame. The way these arms will move around the room is by using these pivot points, and the way we're going to build those is by welding a steel cylinder to the end of the arms. I really feel like I'm getting better at this welding thing. All right, that did work. These 2 sides are now perfectly parallel, and we can keep going. Now all we have to do to finish up this part is to cut holes for the pivot pins to fit into. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but we have to be incredibly careful to cut everything perfectly to size, because messing up a single part in this arm would mean it won't work how we want it to. By now we have built the arm segments and started working on the pivot points. Next, I need to build these funky shaped pins I designed a while ago. They're what the arms will rotate around when we are extending or retracting the monitor arm. If we cut these parts to the wrong size, this thing will end up sagging like the pizza boxes. This part in particular has me sweating because this hunk of steel cost me $90. And if I mess it up, I get to make the drive of shame back to the metal shop to spend another $90. So let's hope I don't. Luckily, I cut this one perfectly to size, but we still have to cut the threads on this, which is going to be a huge challenge. And because I'm terrified of messing this up because of the cost, I'm going to take a break and work on another part. So I'm moving on to making the plastic bushings. In any type of moving project, you never want metal rubbing on metal. These bushings will allow the metal pins to rotate safely inside of the ends of the arms without that happening. We have to cut these perfectly because if we don't, then we could end up with the monitor arm that sags. Well, I messed up cutting the inside of this, and it was supposed to be 1.005, and I was like, I got that right on the money. So far off. I'm gonna blame this on dyslexia. And of course, when I make a mistake like I did on this part for the arm, I have to start over from scratch. That's honestly the most difficult part of learning how to use all of these tools. In my world, when I'm at home developing software and I make a mistake, I know Control-Z has my back, making it super simple to make a mistake and just try again. You don't really have that forgiveness when building things like this. If you cut off too much material, most of the time you just have to restart. Luckily it was only a plastic part this time, and I've learned my lesson, so hopefully this doesn't happen again on a more expensive part. This part is just about to be complete. All that's left is to cut the threads so we can secure a nut to it to keep the arm in place. It's just my luck that the threads are probably the most nerve-wracking part of building this arm, because if I mess this up now, I've already sunk all of this time into it, and I get to go buy more metal. From what I've learned, to cut these threads on the machine, it's all about timing. You have the machine running, and you have to wait until the one lines perfectly up with this marker. As soon as that happens, I have to pull this lever down to start cutting the threads. If I don't line this up perfectly with the marker, the threads will be cut wrong and just back to the metal shop I go. So let's see what we can do. I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of this. It kind of reminds me of when I went to an arcade as a kid and they had that game where the light runs around the circle and you have to hit the button when it's in between your rings. I was never really great at that game, but luckily this has turned out to be a bit easier than that game. I told you guys earlier that it was basically my first time welding and using these machines, and I didn't just instinctively know how to turn them on or how to set them up. I actually had help from this guy, Tom. He's the shop manager here at the shop I work out of, and if it weren't for him and this shop, this project seriously would not be possible. So if you've enjoyed this video, help me thank him by dropping a "Thanks, Tom" in the comments. I know he'd appreciate it. I made a bit of a mistake before painting these parts. For a project like this, I think the best option for painting these parts is to get them powder coated. It's a really durable finish and looks really clean when you do it right. The caveat to applying powder coating is that it has to be heated in an oven to cure. And before choosing my paint, I foolishly pressed the plastic bushings into the arm. And because I don't really want to remake those parts or risk damaging them by removing them, I need to find a paint that doesn't require the parts to be heated. I did quite a bit of research and even tested a few options. I normally would use my professional paint gun, but I really like the look of this textured spray paint. It looks really close to what powder coating would look like, but you don't have to heat it up and should still be pretty durable. I'm gonna get these painted and bring them back to the workspace to be installed. This first part moves way better than I expected, and this installation is going so smooth. Getting the arm to move around the room was a huge step, but it still doesn't mean this setup actually works, because there's one more problem it has to solve. Vertical movement. If this monitor is going to move between all three setups in the room, it can't just reach them horizontally. It also has to line up with the height of each one. And those positions are pretty different. So before I can build the vertical movement into the arm, I first need to define the full height range it has to cover. For the lounge setup, I'm still figuring out exactly what chair I want. So for now, I'm using this as a stand-in to define the lowest point. And this area will be used when I want to have a more laid-back gaming session. For the highest point, I brought in a standing desk. I'll probably build a custom top for this in a later video, but for now, this will do. The standing desk is where I'll be doing my day job as a developer. I've already got the desk in the built-ins I made in the last video, where I'll be doing most of my hobbies, like editing these videos, working on build projects, and of course, playing video games. So between those desks, I need a keyboard and mouse setup that can support everything I do. And that's why I reached out to the sponsor of today's video, Lofree, and their new Hyzen keyboard. But I have a few non-negotiables for a keyboard. First, it needs to be wireless, because with the monitor moving all around the room, I can't have a keyboard tethered to it. Second, it needs to work well for my productive tasks and gaming. Most people default to a mechanical keyboard, but within the last few years, magnetic keyboards have started to gain traction, which means for years I've had to choose between a better typing experience and a better gaming performance, because I never wanted separate keyboards for work and gaming taking up space on my desk. Mechanical keyboards have switches with a fixed actuation point that are great for typing, and magnetic keyboards, which have the advantage of letting you adjust the actuation point and makes them great for gaming. But with a Hyzen, I really don't have to choose between one or the other. Lofree engineered a new switch called Nexus that combines a more mechanical key feel with magnetic input features. So I still get the mechanical feel I've always preferred for everyday use, while also getting the gaming features I'd normally expect from a magnetic keyboard. So when I'm working, editing, and designing, I still get that satisfying feel of the mechanical switch that I love. And when I want to game, it can let the key register with less travel and feels more responsive. And it feels like it gives me a competitive advantage against my opponent. It also fits this setup really well. The aluminum design is clean and minimal, which matches the space perfectly. This feels like the keyboard that can actually keep up with everything I do. If you're interested in learning more about this keyboard, check out the link in the description. Since the base and the arms sit so close to the ceiling so they don't hit my head, the monitor is going to still need a way to drop down into an actual usable position. And at first that sounded pretty simple. We can use a pole to drop the monitor down from the arm to reach the standing desk position. And this works great, but we still need to be able to lower the monitor further for the other positions. So we can add a second telescoping pole that attaches to the first pole and lets it slide up and down. But the moment I started thinking through it more, I realized vertical movement changes everything, because now it doesn't just have to move, it has to move smoothly. It has to stay stable enough to hang everything from it, and I really want it to feel premium. This part of the build determines whether the setup feels smooth and intentional or just super clunky and really annoying to use. And that's where things get complicated again, because everything hanging off of this arm could weigh close to 50 pounds, which means every time I adjust the height, I'm lifting all of that weight, and I'm not trying to throw out my back just to move my setup to a standing desk. And even if I can solve that, there's another problem. Once I move it into that position, it has to be able to stay there, because if that mechanism fails, this entire setup, thousands of dollars of tech, comes crashing down. Okay, let's focus on the first problem. My first idea to handle lifting the weight was to use a traction gas spring. It works kind of like an office chair, but instead of pushing up, it pulls. In theory, it would help lift the entire monitor setup, but the problem is I can't find one that fits the arm for the amount of travel distance I want. For the monitor to sit at the right height, I need at least 17 inches of travel. So this idea was out. Then I thought, what if I used a standing desk leg? It has the travel, it can handle the weight, and it even locks in place. On paper, it's kind of the perfect idea. But the problem is it adds a lot more weight to the end of the arm and even adds electronics to an already complex project, and there's just gotta be a simpler solution. And then I found something I didn't even know existed, a constant force spring. It's basically a heavy-duty tape measure. It always wants to retract, which means it's constantly pulling, and that changes everything. Because now if I mount these in the right way, they can do most of the work, and it could make it feel like I'm only lifting 5 pounds instead of 50. So lifting the monitor becomes almost effortless. But the best part of this solution is that it might solve our other problem too. If I size the springs just right, it could perfectly balance the weight of the system, because it's unlikely that the monitor rig will actually weigh exactly 50 pounds. It's more likely to weigh like 34.5 pounds. And since these springs come in different sizes and strengths, I can mix and match to get close to matching the weight. And because of the friction of the poles, as long as the springs are within 5 to 8 pounds of the weight, the system should stay in any position I put it in and will only move when I lift or pull on it, which means no motors, no electronics, just a purely mechanical solution. Now it's time to find out if this is actually going to work. So let's build it. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. The vertical posts mount to the end of the arm. This will allow the entire monitor rig to freely spin 360 degrees. It works with nothing hanging from it. Now the real test will be if it still works when the tech is on it. We finally have the vertical post installed. Now we get to do the fun part, and that is to finally install all of the attachments. Okay, so we've got the brackets mounted for the monitor, and there's one major thing we need to solve before we can actually mount the monitor to this. Everything needs to be able to hang from this monitor arm. Literally, while I was planning to design how this would work and how I would attach everything, I was scrolling on Instagram and came across a company that already builds something like this. So this is the product. It's called Monoblock. Okay, so we have a way to hang all of our tech on the back of the monitor. Now, one of my biggest questions as I was building this and trying to think of how I was attaching everything was, how are we going to move this thing around the room? You know, great, it is, you know, mobile, but I don't want to be grabbing from, you know, the top of this pole every time I want to move it. So it got me thinking, and I think I've got a great solution. It's a little out there, but bike handlebars. These are you know, I think the handlebars you would use if you're I don't know, in a bike race. I don't bike much, as you can tell. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. I think that's gonna work. Now we can finally get the main monitor on. Probably shouldn't let go until I have more than one screw into it. Alright, how's it look? Little smudges, but dude, that's nuts. I need to raise the monitor a little bit because it's running into the handlebars, and this needs to basically match this. But for a first fit, it looks pretty sweet. While I was building the arm, I spent some time figuring out how to solve the problem of connecting the monitor when my computers are almost 40 feet away. And on top of that, I found out that I can really only fit 3 cables in that tube I installed in the ceiling, which is a problem because I still have all of these devices to connect. So I'm going to solve this with 1 cable at a time. First is the work laptop. For that, I found a fiber optic USB-C cable that can handle the display and peripherals through 1 single cable. But after I saw they wanted $150 for the single cable, I honestly considered just mounting the work laptop to the back of the arm and calling it a day. But I did say I was going to build this to the best of my ability, so I bit the bullet and ordered one. So that's 1 cable down. The next important connection is a direct connection between my personal computer and the monitor. Because I use this PC for gaming, I'll need to use a dedicated fiber optic DisplayPort cable so that I can get full performance from the monitor. Now, that takes up the second cable spot, which leaves me with 1 cable for literally everything else. And at this point, this kind of starts to feel impossible, but that's when I found this, a KVM extender. It could take the remaining peripherals and even video for the secondary monitor and sends everything through a single Ethernet cable, which means I can consolidate the rest of the hardware into 1 line. So the final plan is a USB-C for the work laptop, a DisplayPort for the personal computer, and an Ethernet for everything else. Now, I've gotten a lot of questions when chatting with people about this project around how I'm going to run cables in the ceiling or how I'll replace them if they get damaged. And luckily, the tube I installed in the ceiling is large enough that it makes it actually pretty simple to just feed the cables through this hole. And another question I get is, how am I getting power to the monitor? I planned ahead for this one and installed an outlet in the ceiling, which means the power cable doesn't have to run all the way through the walls. So I can just run the power up the arm and plug it in. Okay, we've run into a little bit of an issue. Now that we have the cables plugged in, they're actually hitting the handlebars on the underside of the monitor. And another issue is that I'm not able to reach the button that is between the 2 monitors. So when I need to switch inputs, I just can't reach it. I'm really thinking flipping the monitor will solve both the cable issue so that I have more space to work with because they'll be on top. And all I'll have to do to turn this on is reach at the top and press a button. I do not like this part. I'm terrified I'm going to drop this thing. Oh, come on. That looks like it's meant to be. All right. The way we'll hang all of the hardware on the back of this is by using custom 3D printed brackets. And just like that, we're connected. Okay, I have one more idea and feature that I'd like to implement into this monitor arm before we call it completely finished. And it revolves around the problem of playing controller-based video games from the lounge area. There are going to be times where I want to send messages to friends or to search for something, and I'm going to need a keyboard. And I don't necessarily want to just have a keyboard sitting on my lap while I play. I think you know where this is going. But as you know, I have the Hyzen keyboard at the built-ins, and Lofree was kind enough to send me another keyboard that hopefully I can figure out a way to mount to the arm itself so that when I am at the lounge area, I can use the keyboard when I need it and continue to play without having it sitting on my lap. So, without further ado, let's go build it. We are moments away from the big reveal and finding out if this was worth all of the time and effort. And all that's left are the final touches. I want to let you know that this is just one step in the process of building my dream workspace. I've got big plans for upcoming videos that I know you won't want to miss. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more stuff just like this, then let me know by subscribing to the channel. All right, let's get to it. My space has become infinitely more flexible now. I used to feel stuck at the same desk all day, but now I actually have options. I can spend my mornings at my main desk doing development work with the option to stand and stretch when I need to. Then when work is done, I can swing the setup over to the built-ins to work on hobbies, or over to the lounge when I want a more laid-back way to game. After spending years sitting at the same desk all day, this feels freeing. When I'm working on hobbies and need a little more space to work, the arm gives me that space back in seconds. Even small things, like pulling down the keyboard to send a quick message while gaming, makes the whole setup feel like it was built around the way I actually use the room. And at the end of the night, it all resets just as easily for the next morning. After spending some time actually living with this setup, I've genuinely enjoyed how much freedom it's added to the room. I'm no longer tied to sitting in the same spot all day. And what I'm happiest about is that all of the challenges we faced throughout this project turned out better than I expected. The arm glides across the room smoothly, and the handlebars make it easy to position exactly where I want it. And while the cables do limit full rotation, that really hasn't been much of a drawback in practice. Since moving from a dual monitor setup to this ultra wide plus a small secondary display, it's felt like a really good middle ground for me between screen space and what makes sense to hang from a monitor arm like this. Really, the only thing I'd improve on is finding a better way to hide the cables above the monitor. But for the trade-off of being able to flip the monitor upside down, it's completely worth it to me. So while I can't say I'd recommend that everyone go build their own, I can say I'd probably do it again. And one more thing, I'm looking to help build out someone's dream home office in a future video. So if you want to be a part of that, I've got a survey linked in the description where you can submit your space. Otherwise, if you want to keep watching, I think you'll really enjoy this one.